Good,
All
man.
right,
We got the pre-presentation jitters, which is always good.
well, that's recorded.
Yeah. How's my audio?
Good. Yeah, it's good.
I got my my little friend.
Oh, all right. All right, I'm going to turn that on. And we have quite a few people who registered, so I imagine it's gonna we'll have a lot of people kind of trickling in over the next few minutes. So I'll give them another minute and hop on. Thank you, by the way, to everybody who's joining right now. For anybody who does have any questions, wants follow-ups, etc., please feel free to either post your email directly in the chat here, or also you can reach out to us directly at our email addresses if we're connected on LinkedIn, or if you reach out to sales@motivemetrics.com, I'll make sure you're forwarded to the right people. So, all right. Well, Kyle, you want to get going here and kick it off?
Yeah, sure. So thanks everyone for joining us, and we're going to be picking up off of what we talked about last time. So we're going to start with a brief review just because we're building on top of that now. We're going to talk about some of the sort of major implications of that. And then we're going to end with more or less 4 action items of sort of what this means in terms of how to manage your account now in the sort of modern Google. So as I just said, I guess I probably should have had the agenda slide up. So we're going to talk about a little bit of a recap from last time. Then we're going to go into the big trade-off here between volume versus efficiency, and then discuss, basically what does this actually mean for you in concrete implementation.
And I just want to point out really briefly, there's kind of 2 points on that. One is really about kind of the general like quantity quality trade-off that you face in search, and kind of also a new strategy or tactic that allows you to kind of push your budget deeper into the market before experiencing those kind of diminishing marginal returns. And the second one, it's a little bit more controversial and in my opinion kind of a profound insight, which is that trade-off of quantity quality, like volume and intent alignment of traffic to your offering. It's also maybe a better framework for understanding basically all Google optimizations, because they trade off those 2 things and they're all different flavors, the same signals to Google. And so it's kind of a profound point, but again, it's a new framework for kind of understanding Google, and we're going to explore that in more detail too.
All right.
Sorry,
yeah, no, that's good. Let's dive in. So I'm Kyle, as John said, Chief Scientist here at MotiveMetrics. My background, I've got a PhD in experimental psychology, and that's more or less the foundation of our platform. And then John, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Jon Piron. I'm the VP of Sales here at MotiveMetrics. My background's really varied, but the one thing that cuts across all of it is an obsession and a fascination with intent. It's the JD part, the legal degree, all laws about intent. Without there's no liability without fault, and there's no fault without intent. You have to mean something, and your heart has to kind of be in a place for you to. So, anyways, long story short, my whole background is basically an obsession with words and intent, and so, yeah.
Right. So we're going to pick up where we left off, mainly by reviewing. So there's 2 key points that you're going to have to keep in mind as we go through this. And again, we're going to go through and sort of unpack these a little bit. But the first is, keywords used to be king, and keywords are no longer king. And the reason is that Google has so many more signals beyond even the query that they're using to match, where it's much more of like a audience matching, cohort matching system today than it is a keyword-based system. So we're going to review that a little bit. And then the second piece, and this is relatively important, and you'll see why as we get to the conclusions, which is part of the great brilliance of what Google has set up in this system is it's an incentive compatible system, meaning they make money by making you money, right? So for example, the better that they can hit your TROAS targets, the more you'll be able to spend, right? And so that kind of incentive alignment gets really good outcomes and gives you some insight into, how reliable should things be, how much to trust them. Even if you don't trust Google, you don't have to. If they're just a selfish actor, it's in their interest more or less to do this matching and solve that problem as well as they possibly can. It doesn't always work, right? So in the past, for example, early days of smart bidding, maybe it wasn't as reliable, but as it's really powered up, this seems to be more and more obvious and true. And it's only going to continue to be more so, I think, as things progress. So,
And I just want to add on there, if you go back to that, the keywords and queries are no longer king. I just want to, for anybody who wasn't able to attend the last webinar, we gave a really, really compelling example of this, where you had traffic going through one ad group, and it was all traffic that typed the same exact query and came through the same exact keyword. It was a two-word word or term equal to the brand name. Now, one of the ads in there was actually driving the most traffic, but it had like the worst click-through and conversion rate. And another ad had really, really high click-through and conversion rates, and it was like the second most volume. So we had a client that said, well, we have a pausing algorithm. Why hasn't your algorithm paused the lower performing ads so that traffic would flow through the better performing ad? And the reality is, in the new Google, that's not how things work. It's not about the performance of the ad. The ads are creating pathways to compete in auctions for cohorts that are priced and separated or sorted by their intent. And so in the example we gave, there were two different cohorts, two different audiences that behave differently. If you just showed one of those ads and paused the other, the traffic from the different cohort wasn't just going to flow through this other ad and behave differently or behave like a different audience with better intent or better intent alignment. So it's not queries, it's not even necessarily, or it's not keywords and it's not queries. Kyle gave an example once where he Googled Ford 9 times and then Googled Chevy, and Ford is still coming up as the top ad. It's not what you type, it's what Google understands about your intent in relation to various online offerings, again, as understood by Google. So that's going to be a big theme today.
Yeah, well put, John. That also dovetails right into this, which I always like your explanation of the slide better than mine. So why don't you take a go here, see if you want to summarize it.
Yeah. Sure. And the way that I think about this, you could see the supply curve there. That's supply of click volume basically from Google, right? And you could see it goes up a little bit, but it's pretty much flat. What that represents is occasionally you see one ad, not 3 or 4, which means there may have been other auctions that ads could have gotten into. So there are incremental ads that can actually get into auctions and be shown. But in general, it's pretty much a finite static like click volume. Now, what happens, the better that Google gets at helping marketers basically optimize their lower funnels. That's why it's TCPA, it's T ROAS, it's all lower funnel optimization. It's because Google monetizes at the click level. So the better it is at helping you monetize to your lower funnel success, the bigger your budget's going to be, the more you increase your budget. And when you do that, you increase demand for a static click volume. You demand the same thing, but a lot more. You get higher CPCs, and that's Google's incrementality.
Yeah, and I think the way I always think about this to make it really simple is Google has a finite amount of traffic, a finite amount of clicks, a finite amount of eyeballs. Their business is matching those to the right advertisers, to the right websites, and so on. And by doing that, sending the Nike customers to Nike and the Reebok customers to Reebok, and not vice versa, Nike makes more money, Reebok makes more money, and ultimately Google makes more money, both because both can open their budgets and spend more, but also because it actually boosts the CPCs, which are determined by an auction, not directly by Google. So,
and what it all boils down to is Google's getting really, really good at matchmaking or pairing. It's getting really good at understanding the traffic that's most likely to convert for your lower funnel. And as it does that better and better, again, budgets will increase and there's more demand for a static click volume. That is how you get your prices up if you're Google.
Which neatly summarized by this slide, Google makes money by making you money. And I think that's only going to continue to sort of grow in importance. And now, one interesting thing, so far this is abstract, but actually you can see this in performance data, and this is super interesting. So what you're looking at here in these graphs, this is keywords defined by the number of words or terms in the keyword. So the x-axis on the far left, those are keywords that are 1 word, followed by keywords that are 2 words. So like red shoes, followed by keywords that are 3 words, like red's women's shoes, and so on. And what you're looking at here is the pattern year over year. So on the far left, you can see, and this is across many advertisers. This is basically like all of the data from our data lake. And what you can see is that the sum of conversions by keywords that have 3 terms in them in 2019, that's basically the dominant keyword. And it's because that used to be how things were targeted. You can see that trend already starting to change in 2020, where more or less shorter tail keywords in terms of just how long the keyword is already has gone down in terms of what's the most important. And the trend really pops out in 2021 there on the right, where not only do you see it trending towards keywords that are just 1 term, but even month over month, if you look at that September, October, November, December's half a month just in the data pool here. So it's not, full on there, but you can ignore that and focus on the top 3. Even within the months, the trend is moving towards shorter and shorter keywords. And the reason is Google doesn't need the information in the keyword itself. It's still going to pull in 3-term queries on a 1-term keyword, and it goes much, much deeper than that. And that's what we're going to get into. So this is not just an abstraction. You actually see it in this sort of global view.
And part of the reason for that is Google doesn't need as many words and keywords because of the explosion of variation from ad copy. I mean, just think about RSAs, think about all the ETAs, think about the explosion of variation within messaging that's happened within Google. You don't need the same signal that you used to need from the keyword itself. And so what I love about this is, you know, the far left, 2019, then you got 2020 in the middle, 2021. I mean, you see, just to give everybody a sense of, you know, what the data sample was for this, it was over 50 customers and over $1 billion of annual spend. So, you know, and it ranges from click arbitrage all the way to e-commerce players. So it's a pretty varied and massive data set. You see literally traffic flowing from 3-word keywords 2 years ago to 2-word keywords a year ago to primarily 1-word keywords this year. That's a sea change, and basically the pathways that traffic are basically flowing through. That makes sense.
Yeah. And what this leads us to, and we're going to sort of build this up here piece by piece, because I think in one way it's sort of obvious. I think everyone probably has sort of this intuition of, you know, you can get more volume, but you're going to be paying a higher CPA, you're getting a lower ROAS, or vice versa, right? That you could, of course, hit your ideal ROAS or better, but you're going to be choking off volume in doing so. So that's the basic insight, but we're actually going to go into sort of under the hood in detail where that's coming from, because it's going to then help us build back out in terms of like what to do about it. So go ahead, John.
Oh, I was just going to say, as like a practical example, one of the things that we could think of is like, you know, as you start to scale out your keyword set, just as humans, like to handle that kind of scale, we basically have to lump things together. And so what'll happen is naturally you'll start to lump things like semantic or search intent themes together. And when you do that, you lose the control, the precision, the, you know, basically having more precise, helpful, relevant messaging, which is basically how you're going to maintain quality at that scale. And so we already know about that kind of basic trade-off. There is one of the ways that we found to kind of get deeper into the market before hitting those kind of diminishing marginal returns. An example I'd use is, let's say that you're an auto publisher and Corvette Los Angeles is like producing some of your top performing traffic. Well, you'd want to make sure that you're into every other semantically similar kind of auction, other auctions that are going to drive traffic that we know semantically and just, you know, from performance data is going to behave similarly. So you probably want to be in auctions for keywords like Corvette Santa Monica, Corvette Santa Barbara, maybe Corvette Miami. The way to do that is to basically have precise enough messaging to be sending the signals to Google at scale to qualify for all those relevant auctions. So in most accounts, you're getting in some of the auctions where you're getting your best traffic, and you're boxed out by competitors who have more precise messaging basically and signal to Google and other auctions that you'd love to be in. So scaling out your messaging and making it precise, maintaining quality at scale is one way you can kind of avoid this. In fact, it's the only way that I really know of. The second point here about volume and efficiency, and sorry if this is kind of like a long tangent or not tangent, but you know, soliloquy almost. But the second part is that there's really only 2 types of optimizations in Google, and they trade off volume and efficiency. And we're going to get into that framework actually right now. So I'll shut up.
Well, I'll just preview this by saying on a day-to-day basis, there's 2 types of optimizations, but there's only one thing you can do to make those work even better. And we'll go into that here as well. So, all right, let's start simple. You know, we're saying keywords are not the center of the universe anymore. It doesn't mean that they don't matter, right? You still want to have a bunch of keywords. It's not the case that you could just put one keyword in for car or shoes and run an entire account off of it, in part because the keyword sends signals to Google about the kinds of traffic that you're after. But at the same time, so do your ads, so do your landing page, so do all of the patterns of behavior and the ways that people are interacting with your website that Google can see every day. So we're going to start simple and kind of build our way out to try and make this as clear as possible. You can think of, you know, basically your keyword set as a giant sort of target that's going to be either tighter or more loosely aligned with your business, right? And I think this is probably intuitive to everyone because it's how you think about your account today, right? Really simple. You could think of sort of a very simple taxonomy here of branded keywords being the most aligned with your business, followed by, you know, non-branded keywords or products that you offer, some medium alignment, Outside, there's competitor keywords, which usually are, mean, median, and mode quality score of 3. It's hard to really fight over those because you're trying to poach other customers. And then, of course, you get into irrelevant keywords that may have nothing to do with your business. And again, I imagine that this sort of layout is probably intuitive to everybody. It's still true, even if keywords are not the center of the universe, but it's a bit different than it looks like, and it's a bit different than it used to be. And the reason for this here, what we have is, this is that keyword target, but on top of that, we've laid on, you can think of it like the query target of a specific keyword. So at the center of that circle in the upper right, there's one keyword in the middle, and then all the little circles around it, those are the queries that keyword covers. So what you can see here is, even for a keyword that's on the very edge of the red there, that's as irrelevant as it could be in terms of like just barely fitting within your cost tolerance, it still can bring in queries that are actually much better aligned with your business. So for example, you might have red boots as a keyword and you're Nike, and it's not especially relevant. They don't sell a ton of red boots, but that can also pull in queries like Nike boots, which actually turn out to be highly relevant, sort of in an obvious way. Now that's sort of a simple example.
I use one that's a little bit more exaggerated, but I think it makes the point really well, which is, imagine you're again an auto publisher, and you could have branded keywords like, your brand and, 2019 Ram, like lawnmower. You'd never bid on that, but theoretically, you could have a query that comes in that says, 2019 Ram truck with bed big enough for lawnmower. So in other words, the query or the traffic and its intent can be tighter alignment to your offering as understood by Google than the keyword itself. And actually, like the examples we're giving, you could actually have tighter alignment of intent to offering, even despite what you type into your query. That's the example where you type Ford 9 times and then Chevy once. You're very tightly aligned with Ford. Do you mind actually going back one slide? Because I think I want to think through this framework or speak through it a little bit. So I want to be clear at what this represents. This is, in my opinion, a great visual and kind of like new framework for understanding the pricing mechanism inside of Google. So if Google understands the traffic's intent to be really tightly aligned with your offering, branded keywords drive a lot of that traffic. You're going to have great economics. You're going to have the best economics, basically. And really, you're going to tap out the most of that traffic in the market. As you move outward, I want to be clear of what that actually represents. At one point, you bump up against the outer limit of that circle. What that is your cost tolerance. In other words, what it means is at one point, traffic is so loosely aligned in terms of its intent in relation to your offering and KPIs that it doesn't behave within your KPIs. So the goal then should be to have all the relevant keywords in places where they can actually have ads kind of extending or branching out to basically give you pathways to compete for all those different auctions or all that different traffic based on nuances in its intent. And so what this represents to me is basically, your messaging is your targeting, same as that example we gave before where, traffic coming through 2 different ads or 2 different cohorts. Your messaging is your targeting, and the better your messaging bridges the gap and targets intent that Google associates with being tightly aligned with your offering, the more traffic you get and the better its economics, basically.
Yeah, and what I want to come back to here, and Jon, you had alluded to this, but I'm showing this, we're diagramming this with keywords and queries. And the reason is, at least you can see those, right? Those are concrete, tangible things that exist. So it should be comprehensible here how a keyword covers different queries, but it's not limited to just queries. This actually reaches its tentacles deep into data that you have zero visibility into. So Google has already removed visibility into a good chunk of the queries that you can see. Across accounts, we see it's 50% plus of that query data is just not there anymore, ever since fall of last year. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter that much because even the queries are only one small piece of the puzzle these days. In Jon's example of Ford, Chevy, and you still get a Ford ad, that's one simple example. Again, it's an anecdote, but it's really helpful because it makes it intuitive what's happening all over the place in much, much more complicated ways. And the only mechanism that you have to sort of reach into that data and help Google pair you with those people is the ad copy. You can see it down to the query, but it goes all the way down to the bottom. And the only way that you're sort of getting below those levels is through your ad copy. And that's why keywords are no longer the center of the universe.
I also just want to point out there's two important things here, I think, that for me were important to kind of understand. One is, why is search intent in relation to offerings, this alignment, framework, why is that the predictor of value? Well, it's because it's the thing of value on both sides of the auction. If you think about yourself as a marketer, what do you care about the traffic? The one thing you have to grab onto, right, before you have all the performance data, is its intent. So if you don't have its intent, you're going to get flower shoppers at auto publishing sites, et cetera. So the marketer cares about the relationship of the intent of that traffic in relation to its offering. So does Google. If I'm looking for flowers and I end up at some auto publisher site, I stop using Google. It is the thing of value on both sides of the auction. And one of the things that always, I find it kind of funny now looking back at it, understanding this framework now, we seem to think that Google goes through a keyword. And we are so primed by keywords within Google. And I mean, think about it, right? Performance, even quality scores summarized at keyword levels. You send a signal of how to bid through a keyword. When somebody clicks an ad, it is instantaneous dynamic pricing in an auction based on the semantic distance of the searcher's intent in relation to the offering. Regardless of all that other stuff, all the other noise, we send a signal through Google, but Google doesn't pause for a second and go, oh, what keyword and match type should I go through? On the way, pairing this kind of traffic to a landing page, it doesn't go through a keyword. We just think of that as a construct because of how we're kind of primed.
That's a perfect setup, John. And a big part of that has to do with the UI, the visibility, and the history. So I'm just going to ramp this up, and I'm going to start actually by going back a slide, which is more or less, this is what you see in your account, right? You look at keywords, you think about these, you organize these, and this is a necessary piece of the puzzle. Don't get me wrong. We're not saying this isn't important, but this is basically what you have visibility into. It's what their UI basically trains you to do. And 15 years ago, this was kind of all you had, right? And so there's the history, the UI, and the visibility. This is the way that we think about it. But yet we all kind of know that this is what's going on. And in reality, when you push on that hard enough, this is actually what Google sees. Google's not even looking directly at your target. It sees the whole world in a different way, which is, how do I match these individual people that I have all of this data on, of all their past searches and what they bought and everything else, what they've actually typed in this time, what are they looking for? How do I match them to the right advertisers? That's the way that Google sees the world. And it only sort of loosely maps back onto what you can see and the way you would naturally see the world in their system.
And Kyle, can I ask you actually to jump to an appendix slide, because I think it helps make a point. Slide 24, I believe, in the deck, what Google sees.
Yeah.
Oh, and do you have the one with all the, I think you might have to click it again to get all the dots popping up on it or bubbling up on it. No?
Let's see. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there we go. So I think this is a good example, right? Like if you think about the pricing mechanism in that auction, again, it's a semantic distance of intent to offering. The center of this circle is basically representing how Google understands an online offering. And that's why branded keywords will be really close to the center of it. Imagine if you go right above the center and a little to the left, right above the yellow. Could you do that? A little to the right there. Oops, you clicked it. All right, yeah, perfect. Let's say that there was traffic and it was priced semantically right there. It was that distance to the center of the circle, and that is the pricing mechanism in the auction. What would it matter if that traffic was exact match to the keyword to the left of it, phrase match to the keyword to the right of it, or broad match to the keyword up and to the left? It wouldn't matter. Google doesn't pause and go through a keyword on the way back out to a landing page. It is pricing the semantic distance of intent to offering. So now think about this again. There's two important parts here. One is the very outer line here is your cost tolerance. It's when traffic is so misaligned in intent to your offering that it starts behaving outside of your KPIs. So then what's the goal if you're trying to be as successful as possible in SEM? It's to fill this up to the outer limit of that circle with as many little dots as possible, as much traffic priced and sorted by intent, right? Now think about the other thing that we said. There's only two signals, two optimizations in all of Google. I know that sounds controversial and maybe even stupid to people who've been in search for a long time, but now think about it. If I go CPA target of $5 to $10, what have I effectively communicated? What have I signaled to Google? CPA of $5 to $10 says send me more traffic, relatively looser alignment. Now let's say I go from exact match type to phrase match type. Google, send me more traffic, relatively looser alignment. Now let's combine the two and see how complicated it gets. Imagine that you go from $5 to $10 on an exact match keyword. Turns out you're going to get more volume, but it's still going to be relatively tightly aligned compared to when you do the same thing with a broad match keyword, which is going to go way further outside of the boundaries. It is all just different flavors of the two same signals and optimizations, which are really the trade-off of quantity quality.
Well, you teed that one up perfectly, John, because now the literal next slide is exactly that. So this is basically, we often call this an efficiency curve. You might know this as the bid landscape curve. If you poke around in Google, all the recommendations on budgets and bid targets and so on, they'll look like this. I think this should be familiar. Often you're only seeing this section of the graph in the visualizations Google shows you, and that's good. What that means is, what we would say is you're on the curve. And once you're on the curve, so follow this blue line, there's really only two things you can do. The bidding is going to try and get you onto this linear section of the curve and then take you up here to the top. That way you spend the most money, you get the most stuff, you win, Google wins, that's great. But at some point you start to hit diminishing returns. And that's the point where John's talking about where, okay, you could loosen your CPA, you could loosen your ROAS targets and so on, and you could get more volume. And by the way, we have clicks here on the left. This could be conversions, this could be revenue. It's all the same, more or less functionality here. So on a day-to-day basis, more or less what you can control and what what the bidding is doing is basically sliding you around on these curves. And there's a curve for every keyword, for every query, for an entire account, for all the collections and so on. So the only other thing really that you can do in this space, other than just toggle, efficiency versus volume, is actually shift the curve, to move the curve to go from the blue line to the green line. And in order to do that, in essence, it's all about what signals you are sending Google to help them sort the traffic and send it to you. So the only way to get from here on the blue to here on the green is by creating more efficient pathways in your account, whether that's more efficient pathways or more efficient existing pathways, right? Well, that's basically the name of the game. And we're going to go through some of the implications of that from here.
And I want to just take a second to think through this in like a practical sense for actually like people who are managing SEM accounts. So imagine that this is not just a keyword. You could roll this up to an ad group or a campaign level. That blue line, typically when you're moving up it and you hit those diminishing marginal returns, that to me is like the point where you're like, oh, I've tapped out my branded, let's go to non-brand. Oh, I've tapped out my higher quality non-brand, let's go to competitor. Oh, I've tapped that, and you keep diminishing or degrading quality in exchange for volume. Well, you can see it literally within Google. You have the bid landscape data, right? The bid landscape curve. It'll show you within Google, if you had taken this keyword from a 7 to an 8, you would have had this incremental click volume or this reduction in CPC. It shows you exactly the trade-offs like this.
Right. All right. So that brings us to what you probably all came for, not us rambling on about the theory of Google, although it's an important foundation, and that is great. What do we do about it? So what does all this mean? What does this tell you about your account? Anything before I start diving in, John?
Nope.
Perfect. So I'm going to start here. These graphs are a little confusing, but I'm going to try and do my best to extrapolate them and make sure that they're clear. What I've diagrammed on the left, and just to be really clear, these are sort of caricature, simple examples. And I do that to make the point clear. They're not literal data of if you go from a $20 CPA to a $10 CPA. I set these up just to try and make the point as clear as I possibly can. So the first real thing here is you should not hit budgets or use budgets to limit your traffic in Google. And the reason for that should be relatively clear, I think, but it's sort of complicated how you get to the clear insight, which is if all you're doing is trading off between volume and efficiency, and you have to stop that volume, you have to artificially limit that volume with a budget, what that means is you could have gotten the same traffic more efficiently, or you could have spent that budget to get more stuff. I mean, it's two sides of the same coin. So in this sort of silly example here, imagine you have two different CPA targets in an account. One you set at $20 CPA, the other you set at a $10 CPA, and the $20 CPA, you end up spending twice as much to get the volume that you need. And then you hit your budget, say on day 15 of the month, right? So for 15 days you spend, and then, oh, I spent my 10 grand for the month or whatever, we got to turn it off, 15 days offline. Now, it's rare that things happen quite this dramatically. I think often it's more common that you'll be hitting budgets within a day. And also I'm sure Google does a little bit to massage around the edges to avoid these kinds of cliffs. That being said, it captures the essence of what's going on, which is in these first 15 days, if you spent your $10 where you spent your budget evenly throughout the month, this is the exact same budget under both of these lines, you're going to get a smooth amount of traffic. And if you can sort of smooth this out so that you spend the last dollar of your budget at 11:59 p.m. on the 30th day or the 31st day of the month, you've gotten that volume and spent your budget as efficiently as you possibly could. Because if you don't, this is the implication. Given that it's a $20 CPA and a $10 CPA, and it's a 2x spend here, the number of conversions here for both of these is going to be equivalent, right? You're getting basically equivalent numbers of conversions. Again, this is a dramatic, exaggerated example to make the point clear, but now you can look at it as conversions over the month. And there's a few different ways you could see it about, is it conversions or is it the improved CPA, but they cash out to the same thing, which is if you can smooth this curve out, if you can, rather than control your volume with a budget, instead you control it by tuning how efficient you're getting the traffic, either tuning your target CPAs or tuning your target ROAS. What you end up happening is, in this case, you would have gotten twice the number of conversions for the CPA for the exact same budget, right? It's the exact same budget for both. Again, it's exaggerated. I think it'd be hard to find something quite this extreme, but it illustrates the point in hopefully a very clear way of any time you hit a budget, you should be asking yourself, how could I have, changed the CPA or the ROAS to get the same volume and either spend less or get more volume at the same budget?
Yep. And I just want to say 2 points. So one is for folks that have like realities that they can't avoid optimizing, but you shouldn't set budgets. I mean, obviously there's situations where you can't avoid that, but I think the point is that when you do have a budget, you're leaving money on the table. I just want to also connect this to the fact that, the theme here is that Google has gotten hyper dynamic. And in this very dynamic marketplace for online traffic, you have to have responsive offerings. The marketer's role is changing to what Kyle described as tuning. It's responding and optimizing those budgets, et cetera. But what you really are looking at here is an example of kind of the opportunities in a dynamic marketplace for traffic. The market opportunities that kind of bubble up and arise, you have to be able to act on them. And if you're out of budget, you can't. And so I think this is a static illustration of that concept.
That's a great point. And again, budgets are often a reality that digital marketers deal with. Let's say you have a $10,000 budget for the month. I'm not saying just set your CPA and walk away. If you have to hit that, you can set that as a constraint. We've got 10,000 this month, but your job then is to try and tune it so that your CPA or your ROAS target basically gets you over the line at the very last minute of the last month. So it's fine if you need it as a safeguard for accounting and everything else. That's understandable, but it shouldn't be we can pay $20 per lead and we have a $10,000 budget to spend. So I'm going to set my $20 CPA, set my budget and walk away. It should be a matter of how do I tune this in a way where, much like we showed in that last chart, let's say that you do this. Well, you can use it for growth. That's the illustration that I basically just gave you. You could bank it as efficiencies, just say, hey, I'm going to spend the same exact budget, but I'm going to, I guess I would be spending less, but getting the same volume, or you can bank it as savings. So it's really up to you what you do with those benefits. But the key point is, if you are using budgets to throttle traffic, you are leaving money on the table. All right, number 2. Going back to what we were saying about, it's no longer about keywords. It's not even really about queries. You can only see half the queries. In fact, there's signals that go much, much deeper than you can see. There's a really obvious sort of corollary here, which is don't fight Google. It's matching you with things and data that you can't control, that you can't see, that it's hard to understand without really sophisticated analysis of patterns in the data. For example, Jon brought up a case study where we saw 2 ads, exact same queries. One ad had 1/3 of the click-through rate of the other one and 1/2 of its conversion rate. So if it was just the ads click-through rate and conversion rate, right, which seems obvious, which is what we've all been trained to do for 20 years, is focus on those because they normalize the data. You'd say, oh, well, if I just force the traffic to go through this ad, I'm going to get 3x the clicks, 2x the conversions. I'm going to get 6 times the conversions. But when you actually try it, that's not what happens. What happens is, if anything, you might lose that traffic. Google's like, fine, now we don't have a good ad to match that cohort with. If you don't lose that traffic, you're going to pay for it. Google's going to say, well, now we don't have the best ad to match that traffic with. So you're not going to get as good of a score as you go into auction. It's going to be more expensive. In the end, fighting Google, it's their court. They're the refs. They wrote the rules. It's their stadium. Don't fight them. Let their systems do what they're designed to do, which is match you. And this is why we really hammer on the incentive compatibility, because I think there's a lot of skepticism. But usually you're just shooting yourself in the foot, thinking you're going to outsmart the ref, the commissioner, the field, and everything else. Let the systems do what they're designed to do.
And, last webinar, we had some really good examples about kind of the value of not, trying to untie Google's algorithm's shoes and kind of, setting and forgetting. And probably the most profound examples in some of the client data where you can see kind of costs and ROAS smooth out and become predictable and forecastable. Part of the reason for that is people don't understand correlation and causation, and they don't understand the scale and the data within Google. There are millions of things that could be responded to. There were so many examples of, teams we work with that say, oh, that ad was deployed, and then there was traffic, therefore it must have caused that traffic. And then lo and behold, no, they already had the traffic in a different ad group. There's so many different examples of where humans get it wrong, algorithms get it right. We're really bad at speaking Google to Google. Software is not. Software speaks software to software great. And so I think that, you can introduce a lot of volatility. And, I think a lot of that is also because we've been primed again by so much around optimizing around keywords, not traffic by intent, but keywords. And just as that example was, right, if you pull traffic from one keyword to another keyword, well, it's going to blow up the performance of that first keyword, even though you still have that traffic. Keywords aren't the thing.
Yeah. All right. This next point is going to be super obvious. I don't think it needs much belaboring. In order for any of this to work, you also need to make sure that you have rock solid data integration. The reason I bring this up, again, it's a familiar problem. Everyone knows it. But if you're going to let these systems do their thing, algorithms can only optimize towards what they can see. This is a critical part of the digital marketer's tool belt. It's no longer optional, where it used to be the case that, oh, we have our data over here in this system, and then we try and control it over here in Google and like map the two together. That used to be relatively functional. It's no longer functional. And the reason is, again, it's sort of counterintuitive, but let's say that you are the last one on to smart bidding. Well, given that everyone else is on it and that everyone else is taking advantage of all of these matchings that you have no other mechanism for controlling, you couldn't even see them if you wanted to control them, then they're going to get the highest intent traffic. And by the time that you move over, they've already trained up their algorithm. So this is now a critical piece. And I think it's a core capability that all digital marketers need to be as fluent as possible in, because at the end of the day, this is more important than a lot of the micromanagement you could do within the account. Well, I guess without this, nothing else matters.
Yeah, and I think of it kind of in a simple salesy way, which is, an algorithm is only as good as the data that you provide it with to learn from. So like, you can't expect something to learn if you don't give it a textbook. So, it's only going to learn if you provide it with the right materials. And it's going to learn on data. So the more data and the higher quality of your data, the better the learnings and eventual performance results.
All right. And that brings us to action item number 4, or recommendation number 4. That is, we've been through all these pieces, but just tying them all together, which is you're always going to be making this volume versus efficiency trade-off. The only thing you can really do is layer in more efficient pathways, whether that's making your existing pathways more efficient or bringing in more pathways as efficient pathways. Either one is fine, but that's how you grow an account. 2, trust the algorithms. Don't fight the algorithms. It's a losing battle. And then number 3, as you're creating as many efficient pathways as possible, things will get cluttered in your account. If you're doing high throughput ad optimizations, you're going to have a whole bunch of old ads sitting around pause that have cycled through. Maybe you're trying out keywords that don't work out as well, or basically, typically the sign now is smart bidding bids them to 0, right? But there's going to be a lot of fluff sitting around in the account and just sort of building up. So the last piece is, in order to do this at scale, you need to maintain good account hygiene. You will run. It's not just the hygiene. You can quickly run into account limits, which we know quite well, of 4 million ads, right? Or 20,000 ad groups per campaign. So it's not just a matter of making things look nice, or God forbid, helping Google Editor not crash on your local instance where it's stored, which is a nightmare. All of that matters. But at the end of the day, you need to keep the good account hygiene to basically leave space and opportunity for future optimizations. And it's not simple. I'm sure many of you have gone in and removed a campaign or removed an ad group before you remove the keywords and the ads within it. It's hard to remember that there's actually a order of operations that you need to do it, because if you don't, the keywords get trapped, the ads get trapped, and they count against your account limits, which is a massive headache. So software is really, really helpful with the hygiene element as well.
Yeah, a good example of that would just be like, I mean, Google's dynamic. It's more dynamic than ever. I think 6 months into COVID, the president of Google America said, the last 6 months were as volatile as the last 10 years combined. So you need to be able to respond to those changes, and software, again, speaks software to software really well and can respond, to those changes. The other part I wanted to, kind of concrete example of this, Google's ad rotation settings like already half the solution. So it's going to rotate things in that are better and not rotate things that are worse. However, without software to clean that up, you end up with a hygiene issue, which is you fill up all your ad groups and you have too much signal split across too many different instances. You don't deploy them with the right cadence that software could to kind of trick Google to get more things rotated into auctions. There, basically, if you think about the ad rotation setting, the only thing it's missing there is a capability on the back end to basically pause and eventually remove things that don't rotate in or don't perform to KPIs. And I haven't wanted to make any of this about our offering or anything like that, but that's exactly why we have that solution within our responsive ad management offering. You've got to have something on the back end to maintain the hygiene. Basically, I would put it this way: at a high level, there's a trade-off, like in most things, between quantity and quality, and that's largely because of our inability to basically handle scale while maintaining that quality. Software can. I mean, you think about math like a calculator, right? Like I could sit there and do math all day on paper, or I can use a calculator, do it instantaneously, remove the human error, and actually use my human brain to do what it has a comparative advantage in. Think about what next to compute. What should I be calculating? You focus the humans on the strategy, on the creative, and you use the machines to execute, deploy, smooth things out, and crunch numbers at scale.
Yeah,
do what you do best.
Well put. All right. We did really well on time today.
Yeah.
Proud of that. Normally, John, you and I tend to ramble. So we got, looks like about 15 minutes for questions.
So we normally ramble. On that note, reach out if you want to talk to us. So for Q&A, we wanted to make sure we leave some time here just to answer any questions. So if anybody wants to ask anything in the chat, again, I do want everybody to know you could follow up with us. We're happy to, it doesn't have to be a sales conversation. We love geeking out on this stuff. So if anybody wants to follow up a demo, a deeper dive even into webinar 3 that we plan on having here in January or February, please reach out. It just sales@motivemetrics.com. It'll get forwarded to the appropriate person. But any questions? Give a couple minutes here. Perfect time to ramble, Kyle.
Yeah. Sharing the presentation, John, that one's for you.
Sharing the presentation. Oh, where are you seeing that? Because I'm not, oh, there we go, Q&A. All right.
There's thank you from Facebook. I mean, Meta.
Yep. That's all. And we'll, we will be sharing the, so what I plan to do, just kind of like last time we had that, I create it's a DocSend space, kind of like a repository for all the collateral and everything. I'm going to create that again and share it after with everybody who joined this. So we should have your email. I figured out we get that from Zoom. So we'll follow up with that. Any other questions? Oh, Kyle's being smart about Meta here, I can see.
I just said you're welcome. It wasn't so much a question, so.
Yeah, we will definitely share the presentation now, and we do have a lot more. So there are more insights we've been kind of waiting to release. Like I said, in January, February. Anybody who's interested, again, we love geeking out on this stuff, genuinely.
Oh, there's one in the chat. How does account structure aid in CPA scoping? SCAG versus intent? Oh, that's a great question. So there's two elements there that I'm going to try and make this succinct. So first off, here we've been saying, hey, keywords aren't really the thing, but you still need them. And we still create account structures. You don't need SCAGs. SCAGs are very much overboard. but we tend to create what we call stags, which are single theme or single intent ad groups. So you can have a bunch of keywords together as long as they're relatively consistent. And the reason for that used to be when keywords were the thing of targeting, this was really critical that you had things aligned because you had to know how to basically channel and control things. That's actually not the reason you need it anymore. The reason you need it now is to create all of the ad variation on top of it, right? Where if you jammed, let's say, well, let's just take one broad keyword. You're selling shoes. You put in the broad match keyword shoe. Clearly that covers all your queries, but you have one ad group, you can only fit 50 ads in there. There's no way to cover the search intent space. And I'm not just talking queries, I'm talking sort of all the way down. Are they looking to buy them? Are they looking for women's shoes, men's shoes, red shoes, blue shoes, winter shoes, reviews on shoes, coupon, like on and on and on and on and on. So the keywords not only help sort of create the template that Google can see and send signals that way, but in addition, by creating single themed ad groups, you blanket that with the right messaging all over the place and the right ad variation that you're going to need. So structure today on the ad group level is as much about basically creating the environment for ads to do their things as it is about just controlling how the keywords are set up. So that's point number one, which is ad groups are for optimization. But point number two, the other level of an account structure is the campaigns. Campaigns should be for management. So when you talk about CPA sculpting, right, you might have different CPA targets. The most obvious would be brand, non-brand competitors, right? That brand, basically you want the 100% impression share as cheaply as you can get it. And Google definitely makes it so that that's possible by basically giving you the 10 quality score. It's relatively cheap, but those tend to be defensive campaigns with very few exceptions. You would not want those bidding in the same portfolio as your non-brand keywords. And in fact, and this is one subtle point, which is the days of using complex negatives are gone. You don't need some alpha beta structure where you're trying to control the match types by making exacts negatives against the broad match to make sure that everything goes to where it's supposed to be going. Instead, you can just lump those together. That doesn't matter. But the one true use for negatives that still exists, besides just global negatives, we can't be bidding on that or whatever, is using brand negatives against your non-brand, simply because shoe could pick up Reebok shoe, Nike shoe. And if you're Nike, now you're branded traffic. And we've seen this before where a non-brand campaign essentially becomes a brand campaign when you look at the queries as opposed to the keywords. But again, that's harder to see these days because back in September, November last year, Google took away about half the query data. So campaigns are for management. Campaigns are where you want the boundaries so that you can have one at a $20 CPA, one at a $2 CPA, and one at a $100 CPA. Ad groups are for optimization, where you create the environment that you can do all of the things that we've been talking about.
I want to give I have a slightly different way of answering it, but we're saying the same thing. But SCAGs, when those came out, that was back at a time before DKIs, before a lot of the tools that now give you the same functionality to maintain word-to-word relevance. And actually, if you don't mind, Kyle, it's a good point to go to. I think it's slide 21 in the deck. I just kind of want to briefly look at it for a second here to make a point. So this is the same kind of n-grams where we're showing performance based on the number of words in a keyword. And what you're seeing here is basically, one word keywords. The very left is ad relevance, middle is expected CTR, and the right should be landing page, not expected CTR. Sorry, that's a typo. And what you see is every time a word is added to a keyword, it's harder to maintain word-to-word relevance, right? So shoes is a one-word keyword, black shoes, blue shoes, red shoes, all relevant to it. Now add one word, red shoes. It's going to be a little bit harder now to maintain that word-to-word relevance. Black and brown shoes are no longer as relevant as red shoes to the keyword red shoes. That said, you have more signal about the searcher's intent with longer keywords. And so these two things trade off. And whenever you're turning on like DKIs, it's going to basically send the signal of, hey, Google, send me more traffic of relatively looser alignment. The predictor of value in your CPAs is ECTR, not quality score. Quality score is correlated with CPCs. ECTR is the predictor of your CPAs. One of the things you do when all you do is leverage kind of the out-of-the-box Google offerings, the DKIs, RSS, even DSAs, think about what they're doing. They're word-to-word relevance. Take a word from a query, put it into an ad, get me just above the quality to qualify, regardless of the searcher's intent, right? So you give me more traffic, relatively looser alignment. We have a very different approach. We believe you should target traffic by the predictor evaluate's intent, and you use DKIs. We have things called templates and tokens. You use all the Google tools at your disposal to maintain word-to-word relevance. So you're maintaining that word-to-word quality, even though you're targeting more of your actual ideal market. And so I guess that's a really, really long-winded lawyerly way of saying you can't target intent unless you isolate themes of intent. And so SCAGs was going too far. It was targeting, keywords, individual keywords. We usually deploy like 2 to 10 keyword ad groups, but single theme. And we use BERT, which is how Google understands intent, to basically understand intent and semantic distances. And we use close variants to understand if 2 things Google says that it's going to treat identical, lump them together. And software can handle that at scale beautifully.
So there's another question in the Q&A. It's a good one. I assume the framework applies to GS and GDN, but what would be some nuances in utilizing both? At the end of the day, we're talking a lot about words, in part because they're kind of easy to see, they're easy to intuit, they're easy to talk about. But at the end of the day, these systems are all multi-arm bandit matching systems all the way down, and it's just features. So you could basically take anything that we're saying and replace it with features, whatever those features are, right? So even in DSA, you've got features, right? You've got some feature of a URL that it's pointing to that Google's looking at to see what it's going to be matching with, but it's just like market making through matching all the way down through multi-arm bandit systems, whatever the feature set that's being fed in is. So it's sort of a general answer, but only because, it's like, well, what about PLAs? What about response? RDA, I'm going to get lost in all the acronyms, but we could have the same discussion about 50 different sort of formats or setups. But it's basically the same all the way down.
All right. Got a few minutes left here. Any other questions? Let's see. Oh, we got one. All right. So are multiple responsive ad units per ad group the new way to go, especially for broader match types to create more pathways?
This is a popular question. I love it. RSAs, I feel like we don't have a single presentation or call where RSAs don't come up. So right now there's some limitations on what you can do with RSAs because there's 3 per ad group. Definitely RSAs are a key part, not only because they're, being the ETAs are being phased out, but also the RSAs, they perform differently with different audiences. So for right now, yeah, you should have as much RSAs coverage as you can, just like all this other stuff. In fact, to us, RSAs and ETAs, they're not really any different. The mechanics are a little bit different, but the way that we run ad optimizations through ETAs, essentially it was like an RSA on steroids. But rather than combining the ad parts within, 15 headlines, 4 descriptions, and then remixing them, we were remixing them to create different ETAs. So as this evolves, I think it's just going to be more and more like that to make it easier to sort of provide Google with all the variants that it can use to sort of piece all this stuff together, whether that's across different ads, within single ads that it's creating out of, or whatever. I don't see any of that changing.
And we have a question here, actually from Blake. Hi, Blake. And I accidentally answered it and it removed it. So I just want to bring it up in case you had a different answer. So it says, is this all dependent on leveraging Google's smart bidding? I said the principles would still apply, and smart bidding absolutely supercharges Google's own matchmaking. What I mean by that is how it pairs traffic to landing pages based on the alignment of intent to those offerings. So it supercharges things in our experience, but it's not like it's required. If the question was about our offering, it's not required for that. But we've seen, and it would make sense that Google would basically benefit or bias its own kind of offering. But
yeah, I would push more strongly on that, which is all of the trends that we've seen. There are use cases where smart bidding isn't the most appropriate. I don't want to call them edge cases, but they're unique. The big issue is, one, if you're not using smart bidding, your ad rotation is only going to optimize for clicks, right? So if you go into optimize ad rotation, and this is sort of it's a subtle point, but it's critical because we've run optimizations in environments that were not on smart bidding, and the whole process worked. The problem was there was no mechanism in place to guarantee that it working actually ended up in the business benefit that you wanted, right? Because what was being optimized was clicks. And to the extent that that was what the algorithms were trying to do, they were highly successful at doing that. And it wasn't our algorithms, it was Google's algorithms were doing that. And it's because when smart bidding came online, they took away the old optimize for conversions option in the ad rotation. And so it's all optimized for clicks. And so it's not dependent on leveraging smart bidding. It will still work. All of this applies without smart bidding, but you're one step up the funnel at clicks.
I was just
smart bidding to get to the revenue and the conversion actions.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, a big part of the kind of insights and learnings we've had over the last year or two has just been that keywords aren't really the thing. Smart bidding, to the best of my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, Kyle, but it's the only thing that's actually auction level bidding, which means it's actually bidding on the traffic based on its intent, not at the keyword level, which, as we've given several examples, could just be missing the point entirely.
Yeah, and we've also seen programs erode as competitors switch to smart bidding. And for various constraints with data integration, it wasn't possible, and you could see it. And in fact, there's a few areas in sort of call it like super advanced search where it kind of obliterated the entire model for a bit. And I don't think everyone's quite recovered yet. But we had to work with some of our partners and help develop an entirely new playbook on what to do in this sort of wild new world. So it's a big deal.
Is that the click arbitrage partner? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. So
yeah, and basically, I mean, just for people to understand, like this, it's our largest client. This is a client that spends hundreds of millions a year in search. Just so our technology can deploy ad copy responsively at a scale that's virtually unlimited. That client basically would have, like, you know, under 10% of keywords getting enough kind of volume to even get quality score. Ad deployments can get that up to almost 30%. So if you're leveraging something like T-ROAS and you can get 3 times as much volume online, you are printing 3 times as much money. It's a powerful concept.
All right. Well, with that, I think we're good. Everyone have a great holiday season, whatever it is you celebrate. Have a great new year, and
Kwanzaa.
Crush 2022 with some of these insights.
Yeah, and we'll have more to come. We're excited for the next one. So thank you everybody for attending. And again, please follow up sales@motivemetrics.com. And if you wanted to even speak with me or Kyle, we can get you directed to us. So thank you, everybody. All righty. That was awesome. So Chris, who asked the question about CPA and SCAG, said best.
John.
Yeah.
Let's go.
No. I was just commenting to you that one of the commenters said best info out there right now. Incredible stuff.
Oh, that's great. I missed that. I'm like, we should get off this so we have the recording. But
yeah, we were going to start rambling again, huh? All right, I'm going to end the recording. We'll hop off. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. And thank you, Chris. That was really kind. Thank you.
Yeah.